Hello everybody and welcome back. This is Emily from Fabrications, and today I am going to show you how to separate for your sleeves. So when you are knitting a sweater top down, you knit the neck and what we call the yoke of the sweater, so covering your shoulders. But at a certain point, unless you want a poncho, you are going to have to separate for your sleeves, which means you're going to have to divide off some of your stitches and put them on hold for the sleeves. And today we're going to talk about that. So I have a sweater yoke on my needles right here. So I've separated out the first sleeve and I'm going to show you how to do that process on the other side. So I followed the instructions for this particular pattern. This is the Strange Brew by Tin Can Knits. And so I have knit across the front of my sweater. I've come to the part where it says you need to separate for your sleeve. So you need to put those stitches on hold is how they often refer to it. And so for this technique, you're going to need a darning needle and you're also going to need some scrap yarn. You could also use one of those yarn barber cords, the kind that you can slip onto the edge of your needle, slide your stitches over, and then pop it off the end of the needle. But scrap yarn works just as well. If you're knitting a small sweater for like a toy, for a baby, maybe for a dog, you could use one of those stitch holders that looks kind of like a large safety pin. But anything beyond that, it's going to be a little bit tricky to fit all those stitches on there. And the nice part about using a yarn barber or a leftover scrap yarn is that you can then try the project on as you go if you have enough yarn that will wrap around your arm. I've just got some scrap yarn from a previous project and I have my darning needle here. So I'm going to load up my darning needle right here with my yarn. And then I've already knit to the place in the pattern where it says I need to start putting these stitches on hold. And what I went ahead and did, because I'm doing a demonstration, was I used a stitch marker to mark where I'm going to stop, just so I don't have to count while I'm on camera. But it also can be quite helpful. So if you are at home, you can also count however many stitches it tells you in pattern, put a little marker so that you don't forget, and that way you're not constantly going back and counting your stitches. But now that I'm ready, I'm going to slide some stitches up towards the edge of my needle so it's a lot easier for them to come off. I'm actually going to pull out the other needle, the one that I'm not using right now, so that nothing falls off the end of it while I'm ignoring it. I'm going to tuck it out of the way for now, and I'm just going to focus on this left-hand needle with all these fresh unknit stitches. And I'm going to take my darning needle with my yarn loaded up, and I am just going to put the needle in purlwise and slip these stitches over onto my darning needle. And I'll do a couple of them, and then I usually load it up, and then I pull through, not all the way. Make sure you're still leaving plenty of yarn on the end so it doesn't come out on the other side. And then I'm just going to keep going. So again, as if to purl, because we don't want to twist these stitches. We're just going to slip them over onto our darning needle. And I'm going to pull through once I've loaded up my needle some. And you're just going to keep doing that if you want to. If you can do multiples at the same time. So exciting. Now don't get too risky with it, because if you drop your stitches, well, then you're just going to have to pick them back up again, which is nobody's favorite activity. But you can often load up a couple. Try to make sure that you're not splitting your stitches. And if you've joined us for any previous knit-alongs, you might recognize this technique. It's very similar to putting in a lifeline in your knitting, except in this case, we're going to come back and we're going to grab these stitches later and knit sleeves out of them. But in the meantime, we're just going to put them on hold so we can knit the body of our sweater in a smooth transition kind of a manner. All right, so one thing that I'm running up against right now with this, as you can see over here, my stitches are starting to stretch out along my cable. So I want to get these comfortably up, and I think I'm just going to keep stretching this further and further. So I'm just going to take a moment, move these down just a smidge, take a moment just to readjust my knitting on my needles, spread them around, get them so that these aren't stretched anymore, and then I can continue. So I'm just got, you can see my markers right here. So I'm just going to keep moving these over. So I am moving a lot of stitches over. I think there's like 80 stitches in this. I'm just following the pattern as indicated. This is a DK weight yarn knit on a fairly small needle, so it makes sense that there would be more stitches to cover the sleeve area. We're doing the Wild Ice knit along right now in the store, and that's a worsted weight pattern or an Aran weight pattern, so you won't have as many stitches to bring over as I do now. I take my little marker off because I don't need that anymore. And then the next thing immediately that I'm going to do is push these stitches down. So now neither of my needles is in risk of stitches coming flying off of them. So now I can put those aside for a second. I can detach my darning needle and put that to the side as well. And now I'm going to find the two ends of my yarn here. So one from the beginning of the sleeve, one from the end of the sleeve, and I am going to tie myself a knot. Now I tie one of those ones that's easy to come back out because I'm really terrible at undoing knots. It would be more secure to pull it all the way through. So you got a firm knot. And the idea is that you won't accidentally grab this yarn and pull out your stitches and then have a whole sleeve floating in the wind. So you can see here, sort of now you can see I've got all of these stitches on my yarn, and we're going to hold them for now and essentially link up where these 2 points are quite far away from each other. We're going to link them up essentially, and that's going to create a hole here where an arm could go through. It's so exciting. But if we do that, that's actually going to be kind of smallish for my arm. So we're going to cast on a few stitches to bridge the gap, as it were, between these two needles and give my armpit some place to be in my sweater. So I, again, am going to refer to my pattern. My pattern tells me it wants me to cast on 20-something stitches. And when you're casting on for an underarm, you don't want a flexible cast on. The long tail cast on is not your friend. You want a back loop cast on. It's fast, it's not flexible, it is a good firm edge along the underarm. It will prevent your sweater from gapping and flapping like a wing under your arm. So we're going to quickly do some back loop cast-ons, and I love a stitch marker to tell me what I'm doing and where I am. So I'm going to pop a stitch marker on here, and then I am just going to quickly cast on those underarm stitches. So you're going to make a loop around your thumb, and you're going to put that on the needle, and that's it. Back loop cast on. It's not handy for most things, but it is beautiful in this context. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just going to pause for a second because in a lot of patterns, they will have you put a marker sort of halfway through the underarm. And that's because your arm is always going to be lying, sort of covering that spot. So it's a really good place to put any row changes. So if you're doing a textured sweater, if you're doing color work, if you're doing stripes, you'll find that they often will move the beginning of the round marker to right in the middle of that underarm because it's going to be the least noticeable spot for having those color changes or texture changes. All right, so I've got all of my stitches for my underarm. The absolute last step for this process is we are going to join our needles to make a nice smooth circle again in our sweater, because as it stands right now, we have this giant sleeve gap. So we need to join this again in the round so that we can continue knitting. So all I'm going to do, you see I've moved my stitches up further on my needle so I can work with it. And you're literally just going to start knitting again. Make sure these haven't twisted around on you, because obviously that's not fun, and that will struggle. You'll struggle with knitting in the round as always if there's twisted. So just making sure that ridge is nice and aligned on one side. And then I am going to just start knitting again. There we go. Boom. I have separated now both of my sleeves. It's very exciting. And now if I continue knitting in a tube, I'm going to knit essentially the body of my sweater. And then when I am done the body, I can come back, grab those stitches that I put on hold, put them on a needle, pick up some extra stitches under the arm, right where we cast them on, and start knitting a tube for the sleeve. And we have a whole other video all about that. But in the meantime, now you know how to separate for the sleeves of your sweater. I hope you have fun. You're halfway there. The yoke is always eventually the widest part of the knitting. So it's downhill from here, my friends. Just keep plugging away and soon enough, you're going to have a sweater. So happy knitting and we'll see you around.